When Dad made my sister the new CEO, I felt a storm of rage surge through me that it led to me sleeping with her husband as an act of revenge, but the aftermath of it all wasn't as expected. But before you judge me, please listen to my story. If you're new here, hit subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. We might be from the same city. Who knows? You ever work your entire life believing you've earned something, only to have it handed to someone else because of a bloodline order? My name is Kenya, and for 32 years, I've been chasing recognition in a family where being second-born always meant being second best. When my dad made Helen the new CEO, I smiled. In public, at least. The cameras were flashing, board members clapping, everyone celebrating the continuation of the family legacy. But inside, my chest burned. Because that was supposed to be me. I had built that company from the ground up, kept the operations running, cleaned up my father's messes, handled crises when Helen was off in courtrooms making speeches. And yet, I was too valuable where I was. That's what he told me. Too valuable to promote. Do you know how insulting that sounds when you've given your whole life to a dream? So yeah, I smiled. And then I ended up doing what I did. I didn't plan to go as far as I did. At least, that's what I tell myself when I wake up at night, still tasting the bitterness of it. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd cross that line. But pain makes you irrational. I knew Helen's life wasn't as perfect as she made it seem. Her marriage had cracks, small, visible ones she thought no one noticed. I noticed, and part of me wondered, if I could take the one thing she thought was untouchable, would it finally make us even? What would you do if your father handed your dream to your sister, just because she's older? Would you still call it family, if you were constantly compared to your sister your whole life? When I was little, my father used to say, "Legacy isn't about titles, it's about endurance." I didn't understand what he meant back then. But when you're grown, sitting across from him in a boardroom while he announces that your older sister, not you, will be the one to continue the family vision, you start to understand it differently. You start to realize legacy is just another word for favoritism wrapped in business language. My father, Dayton, is 67. A man who built his empire from the red soil of nothing. A self-made success story, as every magazine loved to call him. But behind those glossy profiles and perfect family photos, things were never balanced. Especially between Helen and me. Helen, 3 years older, always had a way of seeming composed. She was the calm voice in every storm, the one who could say 2 words and have people eating from her hand. She's a lawyer, smart, strategic, and meticulous. The kind of person who talks less and gets more done. And then there's me, Kenya. The one who does more but gets seen less. The one who makes things happen quietly. The one people only remember when something goes wrong. You ever notice how every family has that one child who's the face, and another who's the foundation? Guess which one I am. When Dad started showing signs of weakness, hands trembling, voice stuttering, we thought it was stress. But the diagnosis came quietly one morning, adult-onset ALS. That's when everything changed. I watched him shrink. From the powerful man who used to command entire rooms, to someone who struggled to lift a cup. His mind stayed sharp, but his body, it was giving up. And so, he decided it was time to put his house in order. He called it succession planning. I called it betrayal. I remember that day like a bruise that never fades. The boardroom was full. Executives and lawyers. Helen sat beside him, her hand on his. I was across the table, my notes ready, because I thought it was just another strategy meeting. Then he said it, just like that. After much consideration and deliberation, I've decided that Helen will step in as CEO of Dayton Industries. I froze. My pen slipped from my hand. The applause around the table felt muffled, distant. Like I was underwater. He looked straight at me when he said, "Kenya, you'll remain as Chief Operations Officer. You've always been the engine that keeps us running. I trust you to continue steering operations. The real influence lies in your position." The real influence lies in your position. That line replayed in my head for weeks. Because it sounded thoughtful, almost flattering, but it was a dressed-up way of saying, you're important, but not important enough. Can you imagine dedicating your entire life to something, only to be told it's not your turn again? Be honest, what would you have done if you were me? Smile and clap? Or feel that sting in your chest that makes you want to break something? After the meeting, I confronted him privately. He was in his office, looking tired but strangely peaceful. I asked him why. Why her? He sighed and said, Helen has built relationships over the years that the company needs for the future. You, on the other hand, handle the operations better than anyone, Kenya. Helen connects people. She's the bridge. You're the pillar. And that's way more important. It sounded poetic and completely unfair. I remember staring at him, thinking, so competence isn't enough anymore? Now it's about who can network better? Who can host dinner parties with investors? He reached for my hand and said, "You'll understand one day. This isn't about hierarchy. It's about survival." But I didn't want survival. I wanted acknowledgement. Have you ever been so close to your dream that you could taste it, and then watch someone else take a bite out of it right in front of you? That was how I felt that day. After that announcement, something inside me went quiet. Not calm quiet, the dangerous kind of quiet. The kind that smiles at family dinners, sends polite congratulations emails, and says, "I'm happy for you," while burning inside. I began to grow more conscious of my sister, paying more attention to her than I ever did before. I watched the way she moved, the people she impressed, the way she handled Dad with that perfect blend of warmth and diplomacy. She didn't even seem to realize the power she had. And that, more than anything, made me angrier. She had everything I wanted and didn't even see it as a big deal. Every time I saw her with Dad, holding his hand, managing his medications, smiling for pictures, that little voice in my head whispered, "She took your place." The company became my escape and my battlefield. I buried myself in operations, pushing harder than ever, hoping that maybe, just maybe, Dad would change his mind. But his health was deteriorating fast, and I could tell he was trying to keep peace, not make waves. So I did what ambitious people do when they feel cornered. I started looking for leverage. And that's when I noticed Travis, my brother-in-law, the surgeon everyone liked, charming, polite, almost too perfect. They had what looked like a solid marriage, but if you've lived long enough, you know appearances are a currency, not a truth. It started innocently enough. We were at a charity gala. Helen was busy talking to some investors, and Travis came over to where I stood alone. We talked about Dad, about how stressful everything had been. He was surprisingly easy to talk to. I made a joke about how Helen always wins arguments. He laughed a little too knowingly. That's when I saw it, the fatigue in his eyes. The kind that comes from living with someone who always has to be right. From then, every time we ran into each other, company events, hospital visits, family functions, I paid attention. There were little things I noticed. His tone, his pauses, his smiles that didn't reach his eyes. I wasn't flirting. Not at first. I was closely observing, gathering data like a strategist. Because if Helen's marriage wasn't as perfect as she portrayed, then maybe she wasn't untouchable after all. Have you ever found yourself testing boundaries just to see if someone notices? And when they don't, it only makes you push further. Weeks turned into months. Travis started confiding little frustrations, long hours, pressure, how he and Helen barely saw each other anymore. I listened quietly and patiently. Part of me knew what I was doing, and another part pretended it was harmless. I told myself I was being compassionate, that I was just offering an ear. But compassion becomes currency when you know what someone's missing. Would you call that manipulation, or just strategy? He started texting me small things. "Thanks for listening today. You were right, I needed that perspective." Harmless. Until it wasn't. Because every message he sent was like fuel. Each one whispering, "You matter more than you think, Kenya." The irony? I didn't even want Travis. Not really. What I wanted was the feeling, that delicious, dangerous feeling of control. Of being seen. Of knowing I could shake Helen's perfect little world if I wanted to. And maybe that's what revenge really is. Not the act itself, but the anticipation of power. One night after a long board meeting, we ended up leaving the office around the same time. It was raining. He offered to walk me to my car with an umbrella. Typical, polite Travis. But when I turned to thank him, he looked at me differently, softer and searching. It wasn't a kiss or a spark or anything movie-like. It was silence, the kind that asks a question without words. And I answered it by not stepping away. One moment we were standing too close, and the next, that invisible line we both swore we'd never cross simply disappeared. It wasn't passion, no, it was defiance. A quiet rebellion neither of us could take back. There, in that dim parking lot, we made a choice that changed everything, without saying a single word. I sat in my car afterwards for nearly an hour, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I should have felt disgusted, guilty, horrified. But I didn't. I felt satisfied. Like for once, the scoreboard was even. Now does that make me evil? Or just human? For weeks afterward, we didn't talk about it. We went back to polite smiles and small talk at family events, pretending nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. When I saw Helen holding his hand, all I could think was, you have no idea, do you? You're smiling at me like I'm still your little sister, and you have no idea what I've taken from you. And I wish I could tell you that it felt wrong then. But it didn't. It felt like winning. That's the thing about resentment. It doesn't crave justice, it craves balance. I wasn't trying to ruin her marriage. I never intended for her to find out. I just wanted her to feel in control. If someone constantly overshadowed you, would you rather see them fail publicly, or would you take something from them that they wouldn't notice but would give you a sense of satisfaction? Revenge always comes with a catch. It doesn't end where you think it will. You tell yourself, just this once. You tell yourself, now it's fair. But fairness doesn't exist in destruction. Because the more I saw them together, the more the satisfaction faded. It wasn't enough that I'd crossed a line. Now I wanted her to know. I wanted her to see me the way I saw her, flawed and breakable. That's when I realized revenge doesn't stop when you get even. It stops when the other person bleeds enough to make your pain feel justified. And if you think that's twisted, you're right. But by then, I didn't care. Because I'd already convinced myself of one thing. If Helen could live her perfect life while I silently suffered, then maybe I deserved a moment where she didn't look so perfect anymore. And that moment, that fleeting sense of victory, was all I needed to move forward with the next inevitable mistake. Envy isn't born overnight. It sneaks up on you like a bad decision. But the truth? It's planted early. You just don't notice until it grows tall enough to cast a shadow. When I was younger, Helen and I were close. She was the sunshine child, always glowing, always graceful. I was the other one, the thinker, the fixer, the one who stayed up late finishing her projects or helping mom with dinner. Our parents never said they had a favorite, but you don't need to say it when the world reacts differently to your presence. Helen got praised for effort. I got praised for results. She'd break a glass, and Dad would laugh it off. I'd make the same mistake, and it was Kenya, be careful next time. That's how it starts, not in big, cinematic betrayals, but in those small, quiet differences. And over time, those differences start whispering, you're loved for what you do, not who you are. Have you ever felt like you had to earn love that someone else just naturally received? That was how it felt growing up at home. I didn't hate Helen. I admired her deeply. I just didn't understand why admiration always came with comparison. In school, she was popular without trying. Teachers adored her. Friends followed her lead. And me? I was the one who helped with homework, who stayed in the background, who got thanked but never remembered. And every time she succeeded, I felt this mix of pride and emptiness. Like I was watching someone live the version of me I could never quite become. Then came college. I chose business. It was practical and predictable, while she studied law. No wonder she knew how to talk her way into people's hearts. By the time Dad brought us both into the company, the hierarchy was already written. I was the brain, she was the face. I built systems, while she built relationships. But the world rewards likability more than logic, and Helen mastered that currency early. When Dad chose her, for me it wasn't just about a title. It was about decades of second place. Decades of smiling while the applause went to someone else. That's the thing people never understand about envy. It's not loud. It's quiet. It wears patience like perfume. It tells you wait your turn, until you realize your turn isn't coming. And when that realization hits, it doesn't make you evil. It just makes you tired. Tired of being the reliable one. Tired of pretending you don't notice the difference. Tired of watching someone be loved effortlessly while you fight for crumbs of recognition. Do you think people break because they're bad, or because they've been overlooked too long? I guess that's where I broke. Not all at once, but quietly, in the spaces where no one was watching. And by the time I realized what I'd become, I was already too far gone to stop it. The thing about secrets is, they don't stay buried. They rot, and when they rot long enough, they start to smell. Months passed after that night with Travis. On the outside, life went back to normal. Inside, I carried this satisfaction. Not happiness, no, that would be too clean a word. It was more like a sense of balance restored. Helen had the title, but I had proof her life wasn't perfect. And that tiny, poisonous comfort kept me warm. I'd walk into meetings and smile across the table, knowing what I knew. Watching her give presentations with that same confident smile she's worn since childhood. And I'd think, you have no idea, do you? That was my little rebellion. My silent throne. But here's the thing about ego. It always wants more. It started small. I'd correct her in front of the board, just to remind her she wasn't untouchable. Then came the little digs at family gatherings. A sarcastic comment here, a backhanded compliment there. I told myself I was just being honest, but deep down, I knew I wanted her to crack. Because if she cracked, then maybe I wasn't the broken one after all. Dad's birthday dinner was what changed everything. The house was full, cousins, board members, and a few old family friends. The air smelled like nostalgia and tension. Helen had organized everything, of course. She gave this small speech about gratitude and family legacy, and people clapped. Even Dad managed a small smile from his wheelchair. And me? I sat there, quiet, drinking my wine a little too fast. Then she made a comment, something lighthearted, but it hit a nerve. She said, "Kenya, you've always been so driven. We're grateful for your hard work." It sounded innocent. To everyone else, it was a compliment. It was meant to be, in all honesty. But to me, that was just another pat on the head, another way of saying, you're valuable, but not valuable enough. I don't know what came over me. Maybe the wine. Maybe the ghost of every time I'd been second best. I leaned backward and said, while drinking my glass of wine, "You mean driven enough to keep this company from falling apart while you host cocktail parties, right?" The room went silent. Helen froze. "What's that supposed to mean, Ken?" At that moment, I was already tipsy on purpose. I needed to drift away from reality. I can't remember what next I said, but it elicited a response from her. She said, "And there it is. The same thing it's always been, your jealousy. Kenya, you're always trying to compete with me. You compete with ghosts. Nobody is out to get you." That's when it snapped. I said, "No one's out to get me?" Travis did get me, though. Right in that parking lot. "Damn, you really be getting it good, sis." The words came out before I could stop them. I didn't even plan to say it. It just slipped out like venom that had been waiting years to escape. The room went dead silent. Forks clattered. Dad's hands trembled slightly on the table. Helen just stared at me. For a second, I saw the confusion on her face morph into recognition, then horror. I turned to Travis. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Shock turned into shame as he excused himself from the table. And then she lunged. She just came at me so fast. Her hand gripped my hair, nails digging into my scalp. We hit the floor, chairs scraping, people shouting. Someone yelled for them to stop. Mom was crying. Dad's voice tried to cut through it, weak but shaking. "Enough, enough." It was chaos everywhere, and in the midst of that, Dad started coughing, deeply and strained. The kind that steals air. Everyone froze. We turned to him. His eyes were wide, his chest trembling violently. The entire room shifted from fury to fear. We rushed him to the hospital. We didn't need an ambulance as Travis and one of our friends who was a nurse attended to Dad and made sure he was a bit stable enough to lift. It was silence in the car. And in that sterile white corridor, with machines beeping and nurses rushing past, I sat across from Helen. Her mascara was smeared, while her dress was visibly torn. My cheek was swollen. We didn't look at each other. We didn't have to. The damage had already been done. You ever realize too late that the thing you wanted to win wasn't worth the cost? When the doctor came out, his eyes said everything. Dad was stable but weak. The kind of weak that doesn't recover, just lingers. We stood silently beside his bed later that night. His breathing was shallow, but he still managed to whisper, "You're both my legacy. Don't destroy each other." That hit me harder than any insult ever could. All those years of trying to prove something, and I ended up proving nothing at all. When Helen left the room, I stayed behind. I watched Dad sleep, his chest rising and falling with effort, and I realized something. He'd built this empire for love, and I'd nearly burned it down for validation. And that validation? It didn't even feel good anymore. It just felt empty. I sat there for hours, waiting for something inside me to shift. But all I felt was the weight of my choices, and the silence of a family that might never be whole again. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't won. I'd just traded my peace for power I never even wanted. Dad passed away 6 months later. Doctors said he died peacefully in his sleep. But there was nothing peaceful about the silence he left behind. It's strange. The house felt bigger after the funeral, yet emptier. Like every sound bounced back as an echo of what we used to be. Helen didn't say much that day. She stood beside the casket, her eyes glassy but cold. We didn't hug. We didn't even speak. We just stood there, two sisters separated by a secret too loud for forgiveness. When the will was finally read, I didn't flinch. She remained CEO. I kept my position as head of operations. Everything stayed the same on paper, but nothing was the same in spirit. In meetings, our words were brief, polite and distant. She signed where I pointed. I nodded where she spoke. It was professional and painfully quiet. People often say time heals everything. But that's a lie. Time just teaches you how to live with the ache. A year later, Helen filed for divorce. I wasn't surprised. Their marriage never remained the same, and I wondered for how long were they going to keep up appearances. I didn't feel triumphant anymore. Just haunted. Because no matter how much I told myself it was revenge, it never brought me peace, just a new kind of emptiness. I'd see her sometimes in boardrooms, looking tired, worn down by life and leadership. And sometimes, just sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of the old us. Two sisters sharing glances across the dinner table, laughing about everything and nothing. That's when it hit me. She wasn't my enemy. She was my mirror. All along, I thought I was punishing her, but I was just destroying myself in slow motion. Because what's revenge when the person you hurt ends up being a reflection of you? What if the person you're jealous of isn't better than you? They just learned to live without needing to prove it. Dad used to say, legacy isn't about who wins. It's about who continues. I never understood that until now. He wanted both of us to carry the company together, not as rivals, but as balance. Helen, the connector, and me, the builder. Two halves of a whole. But I let comparison poison that vision. And here's the part that still stings. Even after everything, she never publicly humiliated me. She could have, but she didn't. Instead, she carried her pain quietly, like she always did. And maybe that's the real strength I never had, restraint. Do you think forgiveness is possible, even when the other person never says they're sorry? Some nights, I still dream about us as kids, sitting under the mango tree in the backyard, making plans about taking over the world. And then I wake up and remember how far I've fallen from that version of me. It's funny, I spent years trying to prove I was more deserving, but in the end, all I proved was how deeply I was hurting. So if you're watching this right now, thinking about the person you secretly compete with, your sibling, your colleague, your friend, ask yourself, what do you lose when you finally win? If I could undo it, I would. Not because I'm sorry, but because it wasn't worth it. And that's something no title, no revenge, no fleeting satisfaction can ever replace. If my story touched you, let me know in the comments. And if you somehow find yourself in similar situation like mine, where it seems like you work so hard and all the accolades go to someone else, let's hear it as well. Darnell Stories offers the platform for people like me to tell their truth. So if you haven't subscribed yet, kindly do so and stay charged for the next story.